At the end of each program at the Borromini Institute, we have the Symposium, the final presentations in which our students, for some of their courses and in particular for their internships, their academic internships, they present their research findings, they share with the class their experience. Enjoy.
We want to go ahead with the presentation for your internships.
All right, so my name's Ari, as you guys already all know, and I interned at Art Files / Tools for Culture. Who really knows? It's the company's in the middle of a huge turnover and change, totally restructuring. So I came in at a really interesting time. So I got to do some really cool stuff. I got to give a lot of my own personal feedback on how I thought the company could grow and change. So that was a really interesting opportunity. So Art Files is really interesting. As Alicia mentioned for me earlier, the company is totally creating out of nowhere this new job. There's no blueprint, there's no kind of past example for how to go about this. So what they do is cultural consulting for cultural institutions. So to give you an example, I was able to look at audience reports for the Washington Ballet based in Washington, D.C. And what these reports contain is information about the demographics of the audience base, information about what type of people go to these events, and basically they give advice and consulting on how to expand audience bases, reach more people, create a greater sense of community around culture and art, and essentially just expand the ability of culture to reach people in the modern day. So can you go to, yeah. Underneath the Art Files Tools for Culture umbrella is also this incredible magazine called Culture Future, which I had the amazing opportunity to be able to write articles for over the summer. And it is really incredible stuff. I would absolutely encourage you guys to go check it out on your own time. It contains Italian and English language articles ranging from everything from personal creative writing to art cultural critic writing to just talking about what's happening to travel diaries and journals. So it's really just a place where creative people come together and express their thoughts, and it's really fantastic stuff. So there's like a ton of different, kind of the rubriche part is the different categories of artistic and cultural writings that are going on here. It's just like fantastic stuff. So please go check it out if you're interested. I have an article up on there. I'll be publishing another one next week. You can go read it. One of them's in English, one of them's in Italian. And then the final thing, which I was able to work on as a part of this internship, is this fantastic map called the Culture Finder map. So what they've done is established a huge communication network among studios, like collaborative spaces, third spaces, concert venues, just any cultural and artistic institution from the highest level to the most grassroots level that you can think of in the city of Rome, and they've put it all together on this map. So all these different colors represent different types of cultural institutions. Could you click this thing on the sidebar? So the different categories of cultural institutions, where you can find them, contact information, how to get there, everything that you possibly need. So this is an incredible resource. The company is also trying to expand and have this idea coming up in other cities around Italy, and it is actually linked with the Italian government and cultural ministries, and it's funded by the EU. So it's really cool emerging stuff, and there's always, all the time, more cultural institutions being added. So if you're interested in really getting into the art scene in Rome on all levels, from music to visual art to literally anything you can think of, this is a fantastic place to find it. All right, so just a little overview of the really cool work that I've been able to do. So I've been able, like I mentioned, to write for the Culture Future magazine. Michele gave me full creative reign to talk about whatever I wanted. So I adapted an essay I wrote in Italian last summer about hyperreality and Baudrillardian concepts of postmodernism and how they apply to the over-tourism problem in Italy. And so that's my first article, if you want to read it. And the second article, which I'm working on, which will hopefully be published next week, is about Bernini and the aesthetics of eroticism in the Baroque era. So that one's in English. Like I mentioned, I've also worked on the Culture Finder map. I've also had the really, really cool opportunity to meet with different clients and collaborators. So I've gone to the office and been able to talk to people coming in who are looking to start new projects, who are looking to collaborate, gone out to lunch, had these really interesting business experiences that I definitely haven't had before. So on our first day in the internship class, Yesenia was talking to us a lot about Italian business culture and how it's very different than the United States. So it's a lot more casual. You'll tend to go out to lunch with clients and make really important decisions in casual settings. And so I think that this was one of the highlights of my experience, is that I was able to really get into this internship without a sort of wall between me and the content of formality, because I was really accepted into the work culture with all of my colleagues, and I was able to really express my opinion and meet with these really cool people and have these really awesome conversations. So that was really great. And then the Washington Ballet audience reports, that was a really cool insight to look into the actual statistics and like the inner cog machine workings of a cultural institution like that, which you don't really think about usually, because they present such a clean, beautiful, artistic, presentation to the world, because it's just your ballet performances, but there is so much like math that goes into the whole thing, which is really, really cool to learn about. So that's a pretty broad overview of what I've done, but I've also, one of my main sort of, I would say kind of like unofficial jobs during my time at the internship is that, like Tom mentioned, Michele, my boss, Michele Tremarchi, he is really, really focused on getting fresh perspectives from the young generation in the company. So he was always asking me for my opinion on stuff, and he wanted my real critiques. So I was able to really express my opinions on everything, which was really cool. So I felt like I actually had an influence on what was happening, and I wasn't just like, the intern who nobody cares about the opinion. So that was cool. So a little bit about my final research project that I did for the internship class. So I decided to do it about sketching broadly and sketching in Rome more specifically, because when I came here, I came with a little tiny green notebook that I carry around almost everywhere, and I like to just draw things that I see and write down things that pop into my mind, because I have a terrible memory and I forget things all the time. So it's my little notebook, and I started sketching the things that I saw around Rome and around different cities in Italy. And I decided to look into the history of that as an art form and how it can relate to tools for culture. So I really think that sketching, especially compared to photography, occupies a more fundamental human expression. And it can capture time and space more intimately than modern photography can. And so on a historical note, I examined the tradition of the Grand Tour. So if you aren't familiar, the Grand Tour was a historical tradition that ranged over mostly the 18th and 19th centuries, concentrated in the 19th century, that consisted of people from the bourgeois and the higher classes of Northern Europe, specifically Great Britain, and also a little bit of France and Germany, going on this cultural artistic tour, mostly consisting of Southern Europe, Italy, and sometimes the Levant and Greece, and visiting lots of ancient sites, visiting lots of artistic sites. And this was kind of like, especially for the artistic upper classes of the era, was kind of like your coming of age ritual, that you would go on this grand tour and you would become accultured by getting to know all of these historical monuments and historical artworks, and then you would come back to Britain and you would be, a fine, cultured young person. So the Grand Tour had a really long history of sketching involved with it. A lot of the people who came down, even if they weren't artists in the traditional sense, did lots of sketching of what they saw all over in Italy, which is really, really cool, because obviously photography at this point is not a portable technology, so sketching was kind of the way to do it. I also talked a lot about Piranesi, Giambattista Piranesi, who's an artist that was active in the 1700s, who's very famous for his Vedute di Roma series, which is a series of over 300 sketchworks highlighting the landscape of Rome. That was really, really beautiful, and I'm really glad I got introduced to that. And I also looked a little bit into more modern writings. by David Hockney and other artistic critics talking about the art of sketching in general and its values. And then with Art Files, just a little conversation I got to have with Michele. This is just small ideas for how these things can be related, kind of revitalizing the idea of sketching as a communal artistic art form by going on little sketch walks. So organizing community like arts and crafts events together is a really important part of the kind of grassroots artistic and cultural revolution that Art Files is involved in, and Tools for Culture is trying to create. So I was thinking they could partner with this really big, beautiful network they have to find places and find people who want to do something like this, like an arts and crafts night where we all get together and we bring a notebook and we walk around the city and we draw what we see. So I thought that could be kind of a cool idea to create this community engagement and have a really intentional connection to the Roman urban landscape. So just a couple examples of the really cool sketches going on. So these two here on the left are by Piranesi, who, as I mentioned, was active in the 1700s. And as we can see here, it's Rome, quite different from what we know today. At the top, we've got the view of St. Peter's Basilica and Castel Sant'Angelo. And as you can see, there's not these huge walls encasing the Tiber like there are today. And there's a lot of commercial activity happening on the river, which we don't have anymore. So that's a really cool thing to think about. And then here we have the Trevi Fountain, which is missing, obviously, the Grand Palazzo that is now right next to it and kind of enclosing it. And you have a much bigger view of the city. So that's also interesting, just to see how things used to be. And then over here, I've got some sketches from David Hockney, rest in peace, who recently passed away, unfortunately, but who did a lot of wonderful, beautiful sketches of the Yorkshire countryside and talked a lot about how sketching was intimately involved with his artistic craft, even though he was more known for his paintings, obviously. And then at the top up here, I took some sketches from Bento's Sketchbook by John Berger. John Berger was a really cool guy, and he wrote this book called Bento's Sketchbook, where he imagined he was having a conversation with Spinoza and did a bunch of sketches about it. It's a very strange book. It's very beautiful. I would definitely recommend reading it if you're interested. And the reason I bring up David Hockney is because he wrote this fantastic book called The History of the Line, where he talks all about how lines, in the broadest sense, in the most conceptual sense, have tied together human society. That is also a very fantastic and interesting book. So just an example of the wide-ranging ability of sketching, the different styles that it can represent, how it can allow us to look into the past and to history, but also how it can just represent the very basic things we see and our most fundamental human urges and desires to create art, what I mean. And then these are some of my sketches that I've done in Rome that I thought I would share. Obviously, Piazza del Orologio, right outside, and then just a couple other places that I've seen. So I'm not trying to create a crazy work of art. The whole point of this project and the whole point of me going into sketching in general is to really examine how it is a personal art form that has nothing to do with like these big ideas of like art as fine culture, but as an expression of the self. So my proportions are way off, details are totally smudged, like there's a ton of stuff that if you actually really look closely doesn't exist or that I, made up or whatever. But to me, it's a way more important commemoration of my time here in Rome than any photo I can take, because in the words of David Hockney in his essay, or his book about the line, it fundamentally has a space in time and place. I don't know if you guys have read The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction by Walter Benjamin, but he talks a lot about how the mass reproduction of art that exists in things like photography removes a work of art from its existence in time and place. And I really believe that, whipping out your phone and taking a quick pic of whatever you see and then moving on is a part of that endless reproduction that Benjamin describes. And so I see my sketches as works of art in their own right because they are situated in a time and place. They have a real connection to the landscape that photography simply doesn't have. So I think they're pretty good memorabilia, better than photos. So that's why I have almost no photos in my camera roll from this trip. And then I talked with Michele about sketching and about the history of sketching, and this is the interview I did with him.
So I work as a consultant, and we museums, theatres, archaeological sites, even municipal administrations, to elaborate strategic plans for culture. This is more or less it.
And your name?
My name is Michele Torinacchi.
That's fine.
Well, the point is, even a photograph, although it may sound objective, it's not. So whatever it is, that's what's interesting, is that in some way drawing or taking a picture or whatever of a monument implies an interpretation. So there is a sort of, layer where the interpreter gives her point of view. So I think it's quite interesting to understand how you end up putting everything in a hierarchy of values in some way, what's more visible. So I would say, the only photographer I may think of that gives the perception of a density like in a drawing is Luigi Ghirli. And he's giving you the atmosphere, also something like the temperature. And they are really, really sharp. So I think it's the way to decide how to sketch it, which is an interpretation.
So, Rome and Italy, especially through the Grand Tour, have been drawn and obsessed over artistically, for a millennium basically. Now that that's being replaced by digital photography for tourists, do you think that this sketching has totally been lost?
Grand Tour was originated by people living in Germany and in Great Britain and having breathing problems. So the medical doctors were saying, go south. So this was individual cultivation. It was shared with other people like them. It was diffused through sketches, diaries, etc. What's the good news now? The people, with the decline of the capitalism, people are rediscovering this junction between culture as objects and culture as anthropological kind of orientation. So it's not more and more an experience to be shared. Eliminating, at least mentally, the army of selfie-addicted people with umbrella, blah, blah, blah. They will be always with us. Okay, repeating them, and that's it. But whoever thinks differently becomes more delicate, more aware, and possibly even more shareable. So it's okay. I don't want to go back to the Grand Tour. I think that we have a new Grand Tour to make. So the point is that if you see the map of culture, it is special, it is wonderful. I defend the idea that culture should be accessible, hospitable, and inclusive.
He's making you understand better the wine culture here, like in general the Italian culture, but particularly connected to food and wine. And this helped me with your skills also because it's a very international work environment. So I'm really curious to see what you have to say, and give it up for Nina.
Nina.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Mina, and like Alice mentioned, this summer I was a social media and marketing intern with Vino Roma, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience today. Vino Roma is an independent wine education studio located here in Rome that focuses on Italian natural and low intervention wines, and they're currently in the process of moving locations, but they're located by Gabrini on Via Colla di Renzo currently. And then unlike traditional wine tastings that are more passive, Vino Roma focuses on education first. That's their motto. So every tasting includes 6 different wines from 6 different regions of Italy. And the sommeliers focus on facilitating discussions about Italian history, regional grape varieties, production methods, and the story behind each bottle. So Vino Roma offers 2-hour educational wine tastings, 8-week-long extended wine courses, private events, and a social club. And one key thing that I found especially interesting, especially working in social media, was that Vino Roma primarily serves 3 different audiences, which are tourists looking for authentic cultural experiences while they're on vacation, expats looking to become more connected to the culture here in Rome while living here, and locals who are interested in reconnecting with their own regional traditions. So overall, the mission is to make wine more approachable and using it as a way to bring all these different types of people together. So a little bit about my responsibilities. One of my responsibilities was creating editorial plans and notes about their social media and content. So that was in order to organize future posts and campaigns. I also photographed events, capturing not only just like the wines that Vino Roma shares with their clients, but also the atmosphere and what makes like a tasting special, and then turning those photos into social media content, including things like short TikTok stories and Instagram posts. And through all of these different things, I learned a lot about effective marketing and how it isn't just advertising a product or a service, but about communicating what makes the experience special and helping audiences understand that. So this is an example of our editorial plan that Alexa and I created. Before creating content, I learned that it's really essential to have a plan like this and to research different trends to create a schedule. It helps to limit repetitiveness and create unique, engaging content every time. So this involves like knowing your target audience is the main part of creating an editorial plan. As you can see, there are some that are labeled as educational, and then others are more lighthearted or appeal more to tourists. So this really taught me how important strategy is in marketing, and meetings with our supervisor to go over the editorial plan made it clear that a successful content plan begins with understanding who you're speaking to and their individual needs. And then the event photography was probably my favorite part of the internship, also because it was great to have a deeper sense of understanding of what happens at Vino Roma events. It makes it more effective in marketing that product or service. And instead of photographing only the bottles of wine or the labels, I focused on documenting the atmosphere and the learning experience that's created by Vino Roma. So as you can see, there's like a regional map of Italy and what kinds of grapes they grow and things like that. And also the experience created by the sommeliers, like having the bottle of wine upside down to show the fermentation process. So these photos become valuable marketing tools because they communicate the atmosphere that makes Vino Roma unique and are ultimately turned into social media content, which you can see here in some of the story posts. There's 2 story posts and then a TikTok about how currently they're a hidden gem in Rome at the new location. It won't play on this, but that's okay. As you can see, the main focus is not the wine itself, but more about like the atmosphere, the education, and conversation surrounding it, and how that can encourage interaction among participants. So something that I observed is that social media works best for Vino Roma when it showcases the authentic experiences and doesn't replace human interaction altogether, but kind of facilitates it more, like in the interactive stories. And then my internship experience inspired my research question, which is, how do wine education and tasting experiences foster community building and cultural connection among locals, expats, and tourists in Rome? And to answer this question, I interviewed Vino Roma's owner and lead sommelier, Maurizio Di Franco, and we can play that.
Well, tourists are always, of course, happy to be there because they're on vacation and having a good time drinking wine. They, sign up for our tastings because they're here. They want to know more. They want to learn more about Italian wines. So they ask a lot of interesting questions. But at the end of the day, they're, of course, there to have fun as well. The expats that are living here, similar story. They're here to learn about wine, but in that case, because they live here, they have a little bit more experience, and so we can actually dive a little deeper with maybe more complicated topics about wine. We actually do an extended course, and so that really is a deep dive into wine. Similar with the Italians, I've actually been happily surprised that they are willing to hear from foreigners like myself about their own, wine culture, which, maybe someone might think is they're more familiar with because they're born here, but it turns out they need as much education on the matter as anyone else, and so they come with a lot of good questions as well. Well, we have a lot of pluses and minuses, a lot of pros too, in that, there are people who come to us that are not, are willing to spend a little bit more money, for example, than locals often will, because they have more expendable income, especially when they're on vacation, happy to do it. So there are pros to consider as well. As far as challenges go, it's hard to build out that community I was discussing if people are just on vacation, they come once and never again. And so, whereas other businesses can rely more on repeat customers, that's rare in our case, especially for the daily event. So that's something that we are trying to foster and bring in more locals in for that side of things. Wine is, especially in a country like Italy, has always been a social thing. People always consume it, especially at mealtime with family, with friends. And so it's the perfect vessel to bring people together. But I think it's more than that. I think it really is. There's always a story to tell behind each bottle of wine. And so people, I think, really are attracted to that side of things as well. At the end of the day, it's an agricultural product. It's not an industrial, beverage that, it's not Coca-Cola that you find always the same everywhere in the world, especially the kind of wines that we advocate for are always going to change and will have that personal background behind it, which is very very important to what we do.
Okay, so from my interview with Maurizio, as well as my personal observations from tasting, and my research revealed some important findings. First, wine functions as a form of cultural storytelling. Like Maurizio explained, every bottle represents the traditions and history of the specific Italian region and their types of grapes and fermentation process. So rather than tasting the wines and then leaving, participants learn about local culture through each glass. Second is the small group format of the tastings, which naturally encourages conversations and friendships. Since the tastings are usually small groups of people, 8 or less, people quickly become very comfortable talking to each other, asking questions, and sharing personal experiences, which is something that I've seen firsthand at events. During my observations, I've watched complete strangers begin conversations that continued after the tastings had ended. I also found that different audiences participate for different reasons. Similar to what Maurizio said, I saw that the tourists at events wanted memorable experiences to share when they went home. The expats wanted a deeper sense of education, and the locals often participated to reconnect with cultural heritage and learn about the regional varieties in Italy. Finally, with the connection to social media, I discovered that social media strengthen these relationships rather than replacing them. Vino Roma uses primarily Instagram as well as TikTok to introduce new audiences with their business, document events, and maintain relationships after participants leave. This happens a lot in the form of reposting stories, DMs, and things like that to stay connected after a tasting ends. In other words, this digital communication extends the community that they build in their tastings from face-to-face interactions to digital ones instead of completely replacing it altogether. So for my multimedia project, I created a visual infographic that's inspired by the 6 different wines and their regions that are featured in a Vino Roma tasting. So the map shows where each wine comes from with a picture of it that I've taken at a tasting. And in the center of the map, you can see that they all come together at the star, which is Vino Roma, highlighting that sense of community and sharing different things from different regions and bringing them to one place. And surrounding it are quotes from the interview with Maurizio about how wine is a vessel to bring people together, and how wine is always going to change with a personal background, and how it's more of a storytelling tool than anything else. So overall, this translates my research into a visual format and illustrates how the wines come together. And then key takeaways, I have 3 key takeaways, which is that wine is more than a beverage, but it's a gateway to Italian history, regional identity, and cultural traditions, and every bottle has a story to connect people. Education creates community. These small group tastings encourage conversation, curiosity, and lasting relationships. Locals, expats, and tourists all participate originally for different reasons, but leave with shared experiences and connections. Finally, it's that digital communication strengthens in-person experiences, not replaces them. Social media introduces new audience, documents events, and maintains connections. And effective marketing highlights the experience and the sense of the community that you get at the tasting instead of just the products. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, now we have Amy, you were with Town, which we've been working for a little while now, and I saw that you did so many things, like editing and work with the newsletter, appeared in social media content, so I'm gonna look for that later. And I just love the fact that you were in a different country, but also like in an environment with different cultures. I think that was such a unique and amazing experience for someone. And I love your comments about what you learned, what you got away with, like your intercultural skills. So let's see.
Give it up for Amy.
Okay, so I had the great opportunity this summer along with Mia. So this is just kind of what I learned throughout my internship and the research I did. So what is Hummus Town? Hummus Town is a nonprofit Syrian restaurant, and their mission is to provide stable employment and help people socially integrate into Italy. It started out with more of Syrian refugees, but as time has gone on, they've gone on to include other vulnerable populations. And they also host a variety of community events, and they seek to promote intercultural exchange through their food. Here's some pictures I took of the food I got to eat. It was very amazing. Yeah. So throughout my internship, I was mainly in charge of the newsletter, so I would put them all together, and they would contain upcoming events, dish spotlights, which is a new section that I added, and every dish I would kind of write a fun fact to teach people about Syrian culture and like the history behind it. Event recaps, so if they had an event, that was usually like the banner, and then just a collection of all the links and resources you would need if you wanted to get catering, if you wanted to learn more, if you wanted to intern there, all of the above. I also helped to recode some of the HTML and CSS within the template, since the newsletter was not really mobile friendly. So fix that. Now you can see it on your phone, which is great, and will definitely help people, be more accessible to people. I analyzed the stats and the overall subscriber engagement throughout the newsletter. I worked on a fundraising campaign for GoFundMe, and I helped film cooking classes that they hosted, and I also helped out in social media videos. So my research thesis was that Hummus Town uses a diverse amount of communication methods and unique community activities to foster social support and belonging within the Roman community. So just some background. So when you think of refugee resettlement, you think of the primary objectives, which are housing, legal documentation, and employment. But the part that I think is extremely important to actually feeling integrated into a new country is social integration, belongingness, community. And refugees do face significant obstacles such as discrimination, social isolation, language barriers, etc. And that can lead people to not really feel socially integrated, even despite having traveled all the way there, moving there. And then I did a little bit of research into the health benefits. So successful social integration is associated with decreased mortality risk and also decreased depressive symptomatology. And past research has always been about psychology as like a lack of psychopathology or a lack of mental illness, but less research is done on things like this last bullet point: resilience, hope, belongingness, and social support. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of explore that, and all of those factors were associated with higher life satisfaction and higher scores on the flourishing scale. And then I also got to research a lot about outreach. I'm a psychology major. I don't know too much about communications, but through this I got to learn so much. Outreach is obviously extremely important in spreading awareness about this nonprofit, to reach clients, to reach people that Hummustown wants to employ, people who are in need of a job. And organizations must be strategic in how they plan these marketing initiatives. And social media presence should be dialogic and two-sided to gain and retain audience attention. So I learned about relationship management theory, which is that basically that public relations is more of managing relationships between you and the audience, and it's not just messaging at people. So in a study, they used RMT, and they found that more total post engagement was more associated with photo posts, longer posts, and less frequent posts. So overall, it's just super important to have a strategic outreach, since you can have an amazing nonprofit, but if you can't reach people, then it's really difficult to kind of see that social change that you are aiming to promote. And so I kind of analyzed like the newsletter and social media. With the newsletter, I noticed that the open rate was relatively stable, which shows that they are engaging or maintaining an engaged audience that consistently interacts with the newsletters, wants to know about events, wants to click through, explore the website, all the resources. And also throughout the couple newsletters I wrote, we reached more unique recipients. We increased them from 48 to 63. So as you continue to communicate with people, it will reach a growing number of community members. And then as for social media, I noticed that like a post in collaboration with the jazz musician gained 104 likes, and posts that are more about event promotions gain an average of 25 likes. So it just goes to show that collaboration and spreading your communication to wider audiences, people with more followings, is very important. And I think that the people who went to the event also were contributing to the likes of this jazz night, and just shows that like you need to have this two-sided relationship instead of like event promotions like all the time, which are just kind of one-sided, and it's just like, hey, here's the event. People like to see themselves featured. People like to just engage with that in that way. And yeah, just collaboration is extremely important. And so here are some of the community events that Hummustown puts on that I learned about through writing this newsletter. So they have wine tours with the winery that the founder Shaza owns. They have sunset picnics. They have catering events, World Cup watch parties, weekly buffet. And all of these events, they rely on strategic communication, outreach, collaboration, and engagement. None of this can be possible if people do not go to them. So that is why it is so important to have successful outreach to lead to more awareness of their mission, more support, and then it allows employees and the community to engage with each other, which thus contributes to a larger sense of community and belonging for the people working there. This is my interview with them.
I first heard about Hummustown several years ago, so maybe 8 years ago. I was staying in Rome with a friend of mine who had been working for one of the few international NGOs here in Rome, and they actually had Hummustown do catering for their lunches. So that's the first time I ever really heard of Hummustown, but yeah, did not have any own experience. For me personally, coming in, I think it's definitely Shaza, the founder, is a really big part of it, because she's just such a warm and lovely personality, which I think is very infectious. And then other staff members, like at the end of the day, it's the team. but it helps that the restaurant from where we effectively kind of work together most of the time is a extremely pleasant and pretty place with like nice music, and the food bonds people together, and it's amazing. Most of the staff who have come in at whichever point in time like have at least spoken Arabic, sometimes exclusively Arabic. So even I would say to this day, like some of our staff speak Arabic and at this point Italian, at least enough, or Arabic and like English and maybe some Italian. But yeah, it's been a learning process. It's been learning on the job. It's been trying to sort of help out and like help to translate like documents that they maybe sent. It's just helping people whenever they need it, or yeah, like refer to a language class. I would say that's quite a difficult question. Like it's very broad. I would say to the end of the day, maybe it depends on how they feel, how socially well integrated they are. Because I also know, American expats who've been living here for a very long time, but also don't necessarily feel socially integrated. But then maybe through their children's schools, like at least like they're part of a community. So I would say for the people who are here, like, they have definitely met and like expanded their community through Town, but in terms of like integration into Italy, like that would be too difficult to assess. It's usually word of mouth. So yeah, it's usually like a friend of someone who has either worked for us in the past, like, or works for us now. Or a relative of a contact, for example, of Shaza or her family. But yeah, word of mouth really is how they find out. Oh, I would say immensely. And I mean, it can be like tricky in terms of dynamics, like even because like Syria is a very diverse country where, yeah, a lot of the conflict, let's say in the past and also is the situation now, has been fueled by sectarian lines. So if you are of a certain like sect or religion or region, like within Syria, this can create some tension, and even here it can create some tension as well. But like Shaza and the team, the managements have try to make as clear as possible to the staff, like here we're all equals. We cannot bring, let's say, these divisions into the workplace. It's a complex question, but so indeed, like with new people as well, like it's really important that they focus on like we're all here for the same goal, and we try to embrace our differences.
I think that's amazing.
The idea of a mosaic is kind of similar to like diversity. There's so many teeny tiny pieces, and like if you look at them separately, they're just like little scraps, but if you put them together, it makes a beautiful piece of art. And like just there's so many cultures, backgrounds, and stories that make up Town. I was doing some research into important symbolism in Syria, and the olive tree was a very important one, which represents resilience, peace, and deep ties to the land. I think that's super relevant. Moving to a new country as a refugee is like a really difficult or like scary thing to do, and people who go through it are very resilient. All the employees are very resilient people and have had to go through so many struggles to get to where they are today. And the Mediterranean region, so from the east to the coast of Syria and Palestine, is also believed to be the birthplace of the domesticated olive tree that we know today. And I kind of thought that was interesting since we talked a lot about olive oil. We learned about olive oil in class. Olive oil is a huge staple in Italian cuisine. So it just kind of shows how the Middle East and Italy are very intertwined. And I think it also represents my journey in Rome too, because when I was making this, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many pieces, but I just had to glue it on, and if it looked bad, like I just had to keep going because that's the only way you can make this, and I feel like that's how it is in Rome too. You just kind of have to go with the flow. If something happens, like just work around it. And yeah, so this is the map that we got like the first day or first week here, and then this is just recycled material. It has blue leaves because I used a napkin from Town. And yeah, that was my portfolio project. Thank you.
People know this mission too. It's so important to have an active social media that engages younger people, which are very active on TikTok. So I'm really curious to see what you did, also because I don't know how to use it. So I can learn something from you. So here you are for Mia.
Hi, so I'm Mia, as you guys know, and I worked as a TikTok intern at Hummustown over the summer. So basically what Hummustown is, it started as a little catering business in the founder Shaza's apartment, but as the years went on, it flourished into a whole social enterprise. So basically, Hummustown has 3 restaurant locations. So it has a restaurant and bistro by the pyramid, and then it also has a kiosk that me, Ari, and Amy visited by the Republico station. So its purpose is to provide employment for Syrian refugees while supporting their integration into Italian society. And as Amy kind of mentioned in her research project, a key thing that must happen is to increase visibility not only for the brand but also for what it represents for its culture through social media. So what I did was I worked on content creation. So I made content to promote Hummustown's food and events. So for example, Shaza had planned out a little picnic in a park, so I had made a little flyer for that. And then it also focused on making the organization more visible through short form visual storytelling. So U Arkansas, so we collaborated with U Arkansas. So I had kind of made a little TikTok kind of demonstrating what food that they had made, and also there was a really cute little segment of the main manager Fadi dancing, so I made a little content off of that. And then I also made a social media calendar kind of just to hold accountability for each of the interns, and essentially just to make sure that we were all on board with what was expected of us. And it really helps strategize outreach and external and internal communications. And then finally, I worked on collaborating and media production. So I also collaborated with other interns and staff to brainstorm content creation ideas. So I know that one of our interns was working more directly with the GoFundMe. So I had reached out to her to kind of see what ideas would be for outreach for that mission, even if I wasn't to work on it. So yeah. And then here are some of my examples. I probably can't show it here, but right here, it's me and Amy trying Gaza Cola, which Hummustown offers. And then here's the U Arkansas Hummustown. And then here's a clip from one of the catering events using the TikTok Melanie Give Me 10 audio, kind of just to use a more popular sound. So then my research kind of focused on social media storytelling and why NGOs ought to use social media as a form to not only engage audiences but also create a relationship with them. And I chose this topic because I think that working with social media as an NGO focusing on Syrian refugees is kind of ethically limiting, because as I kind of observed with other storytelling around this issue, it kind of just puts these refugees into a greater category and limits their own individuality to show, which I think can be ethically challenging, especially if we're really trying to support Syrian integration. So basically that goes into the key question of how can Hummustown gain public support without reducing Syrian refugee workers to a victim-centered narrative. So essentially my thesis is that Hummustown can adopt a recognition and food-based centered mode of storytelling in its social media content. So this approach presents workers as active subjects with individuality and cultural knowledge, which can allow Hummustown to garner public support while ethically representing the people at its center. So my research had 3 findings. So my first section kind of focused on why Hummustown ought to use social media and the right way to use it. So social media platforms are essential for nonprofits to inform, to build community, and encourage action towards them. And then the study had found that many NGOs aren't using social media as best as they could, and kind of what Amy had said, it works best when it's twofold. So when when a post can invite viewers to answer, to engage, to respond, then that creates an essential relationship with external stakeholders
to basically be like, hey, like I actually do have like a mission, I have a purpose with this NGO, and thus I will like, you know, maybe go to their events with Hummus Town, go to their restaurant and like order some food. And it also like works best when it's like narratively grounded too. A study had found that when they had presented like their mission through like a specific narrative rather than like hard concrete facts, more external stakeholders were more willing to like engage with that content. So going off of that, my second section kind of like focused on how Hummus Town ought to use the storytelling. So I had found that pity face storytelling creates ethically challenging visibility that limits integration. So media representing refugees often rely on reductive stereotypes that often make refugees recognizable through fixed narrative voices. So although like this can create visibility, it isn't the right one for refugees, and it does not foster integration because refugees do require social recognition of having agency and the capacity to participate in a public community rather than being kind of like boiled down to just a victim and someone who needs help. So, and then finally my third section focused on integration. So kind of like putting these two together, storytelling that is centered around food can basically allow Hummus Town to increase in visibility with ethical recognition. So Hummus Town's dual identity as a restaurant and as an organization can allow it to use cultural and food-centered storytelling to increase visibility while preserving ethical representation by bringing student culture into visibility and into visible relation with Italian social life, and thus increasing cultural awareness. So, and this is the video with Brenda.
Well, it kind of comes with, our mission statement more broadly. So in Italian, there's an expression that's la buona forchetta. It's like a good fork, which means good food. So in Italian, we would say buon cuore da buona forchetta. So like a good heart brings about good food. And that's really sort of, the core of our mission in what sets us apart, because it's just based on very explicit humanitarian values. It's really, Shaza founded this recognizing how many Syrians had fled to Italy and came into Rome that you heard about, who were just desperately looking for work, because that's really where everything else kind of starts. Started like catering from her own kitchen, and that really, I think that's quite a unique, let's say, origin story. And these humanitarian values are still what really spark us and sets us apart today. It's the most sustainable way to support, let's say, a human being coming into a new place. Like, it's obviously you need a roof over your head, but you usually, without an income, you cannot sustain like a roof over your head. Like a lot of the other, a meal today is not a meal tomorrow, and we really think that through employment, through this sense of independence, this sense of like sort of self-reliance, being able to plan accordingly, like plan your accommodation, like plan your meals, like plan your expenses, and having this certainty helps so much to ground people, especially when they come in having overcome like such adversity. So it's a big one. Well, it's a really tricky one, but it's the, let's say, it's a similar shift to let's say at this point already like a couple decades ago, like victims of certain crimes that were then basically claimed the label survivor. And on the one hand, like, yes, it's more empowering, and it makes you less of a charity case if you're not a victim. But there's the flip side where indeed, like, if you don't, let's say, really acknowledge what the adversity, like the difficulty that you've been through, that you have suffered through something, then maybe it explains away a bit of indeed where you come from and the kind of help that you need now, and how strong you are in overcoming this intense difficulty. From the viewpoint that like financially we're still kind of a struggling like new business. Like, on the one hand, it's like we don't want this to feel like a handout, but we are still asking for support because everyone here cares so much about the mission, even if at this point we're not like fully profitable organization yet. So we walk a fine line. I want them to feel good, like positive vibes. Curious. I would like for them to be curious both about, let's say, our mission, but definitely about the food. Like the food is at the core of everything. Like if we don't have good food, like it doesn't really matter what else we do. And I think food is always it's like a gateway to a culture, right? We become more interested in the differences and these flavors and where does this come from and how typical is this, especially if it's combined with like an interior and music. It's just such a solid representation of culture that hopefully sparks curiosity and interest.
But my name's Alexa, as you guys know, and I'll be sharing my experience with the Vino Roma internship. And this internship gave me the opportunity to combine my interests in communications, marketing, and culture while also working in a small local business. Throughout the summer, I learned not only about social media marketing, but also about how businesses can preserve culture and build community through authentic experiences. I'll be talking about what Vino Roma is, what I learned professionally, then there'll be an interview I conducted with the founder, my research project, and the multimedia project. So what is Vino Roma? Again. Vino Roma is a small company located in the heart of Rome that strives to create a sense of community around low intervention wine. Rather than simply offering tastings, Vino Roma creates educational experiences for both tourists and locals. Their goal is to introduce guests to low intervention wines while also teaching them about Italian culture, regional traditions, and stories behind each bottle. One thing that makes Vino Roma different is its approach to education. Instead of giving a lecture, the tastings are more conversational. Guests are encouraged to ask questions, share opinions, and discuss the wines together. This creates a much more welcoming and interactive experience. Recently, Vino Roma moved out of its original location and it's temporarily hosting tastings in the Prati neighborhood while preparing for the next chapter. Even with this transition, they've continued to build their community through social media and word of mouth. As a marketing intern, I helped create Instagram and TikTok content to communicate this sense of authenticity and community to a wider audience. So as far as my professional experience, working at Vino Roma has taught me several valuable professional skills that I'll carry into my future career. The first was planning and organization. Because Vino Roma is a small company, everyone wears multiple hats. I wasn't only creating content, I also participated in meetings, helped organize editorial calendars, planned upcoming content, and communicated with different members of the team. I quickly realized how important organization is when working in a small business where every task matters. The second lesson was creativity while staying true to the company's voice. Every social media post needed to reflect Vino Roma's personality. Their brand is educational but approachable, professional but welcoming, and this challenged me to think creatively while making sure every piece of content stayed authentic to who they are. Finally, I experienced a lot of professional growth. Through the internship, I learned to accept feedback as a part of the creative process. Instead of seeing critiques as criticism, I learned to use them to improve my work, and I also became much more comfortable asking questions whenever I wasn't sure about something. Those conversations helped me learn faster and become more confident in my abilities. Overall, this internship strengthened both my marketing skills and confidence as a young professional. One of the highlights of my internship was interviewing with the founder of Vino Roma, Maurizio Di Franco. During the interview, he shared the inspiration behind creating Vino Roma and explained why building community is just as important as serving wine.
What attracted me to wine in the first place was the fact that it was so important to Italian culture. It's part of its history, part of the, like I was saying, bringing family and friends together, and of course, it's so important to mealtime. And so for me, that was the most fascinating part, that it's not just a beverage that people pick up at the store like any other, but a beverage with its own history and story to tell. And so the fact that people are still invested in that here, and the winemakers are still willing to, despite the cost, despite the effort that it takes to make a good bottle of wine, are still doing it because it's so much part of the culture. Obviously, we want to interact with the clients as much as possible. We're not just, reciting off facts. We're not. It's not a lecture, but rather it's a back and forth. And so we'll ask right off the bat to loosen them up. get their background in wine, their wine tasting habits, the sort of their preferences, the kind of wines that they like to drink, and if anyone's done the kind of tasting or wine education in the past. And then throughout, we'll ask them questions, not just what do you think of this wine, but what are you tasting? How would you describe it? What kind of food do you think works with it? Right? So always kind of a back and forth. Make sure they're always engaged is very important. It's through word of mouth and Google searches. Thankfully, our SEO is not through any effort on my part, I have to say, but just organically over time has become really good for us. It helps that our name is literally Vino Roma, so who are searching for wine in Rome very easily find us. TripAdvisor is another great resource, but social media, like I think a lot of businesses today, is super important. Definitely on the Italian side of things, people find us a lot through Instagram specifically, though we're trying other channels like TikTok, for example. That's been more for, I've noticed that's more travelers, more tourists, especially younger generation. So that's been helpful. So yeah, we're trying to push that more and more. I expect to see some more of what we do. I don't want to say copycats because that's not charitable, but we have been doing this a long time, and now I've noticed, for example, that cooking classes have become very fashionable, and so you'll see more and more of those appearing. And I think it just stands to reason that people who are interested in learning how to cook food will also be interested in learning more about the wine that they're serving with that food. To that end, we're actually going to be implementing cooking classes through a colleague of ours, not directly because we focus on wine, but at our new space in September. So hopefully we can push the wine side of things through the cooking classes as well.
So along with my internship, I completed a research paper titled How Wine Tasting Experiences Help Promote Italian Culture and Local Businesses in Rome. My research explored how wine tourism has changed over the past several years. Instead of simply tasting wine, travelers increasingly want authentic cultural experiences where they can learn about local traditions and connect with people behind the actual products. I found that businesses like Vino Roma help preserve this Italian culture by educating visitors about regional wines, local history, and traditional food pairings. These experiences also support small businesses by encouraging tourists to visit neighborhood wine bars, restaurants, and producers rather than only major tourist attractions. One of the most important findings of my research was that wine serves as a way to bring people together. At every tasting I attended, conversations naturally developed among people from different backgrounds, and by the end of the evening, many guests who had arrived as strangers left feeling like friends. This showed me that Vino Roma isn't simply selling wine, it's creating meaningful cultural connections through shared experiences. For my multimedia project, I created a digital photo collage titled Vino Roma Summer. All of the photos included were taken by me at one of the tastings when I was creating content for Vino Roma's Instagram and TikTok throughout the summer. I included 4 words that best represent my experience. The first is local, because Vino Roma partners with neighborhood wine bars and supports local businesses instead of focusing on large commercial venues. The second is culture, because wine is deeply connected to everyday life in Italy. Throughout my internship, I saw how meals, conversations, and traditions often revolve around sharing wine together. Third is low intervention, because this type of wine is at the center of everything that Vino Roma does. Educating guests about low intervention wine became one of the main themes of both my internship and social media content. Finally, I chose community because that's what stood out to me the most. Every tasting encouraged conversations, questions, and genuine connections. Even after attending just one event, guests left feeling welcomed and connected to both the people and the local culture. Creating this collage allowed me to reflect on everything I experienced during my internship and visually capture what made this summer so meaningful. To conclude, my internship at Vino Roma gave me much more than professional marketing experience. It taught me how culture can be preserved through storytelling, how small businesses can build strong communities, and how meaningful experiences can connect people from around the world. I'm grateful for everything I learned this summer, from developing my marketing skills to gaining a much deeper appreciation for Italian culture. Thank you all for listening.
Roma, first of all, everybody wants to say thank you to Rome. Grazie Roma.